Good morning. You guys are having a great Tuesday. I'm going to tell you what all I have here in front of me. I bet I have something in front of me you haven't seen in a quick minute, depending on your age. Let's go ahead and talk about it. We're going to talk about real estate today. Colleen, good morning. If you got some time, come join me, Colleen. Let's chat if you're available. Who knows what this is? Again, here's my thumb, so it's a decent size. You know what these are. If you've hung around me for a minute, you might know what these are for. I've got an entire little jar of them, but haven't seen one of these in a while, huh? So I'll let you guys in on, you're correct, a $50, 50 cent, $50. I'll let you in on a little secret. We got a whole bunch of these from, we had to order them from the bank, went through them, pulled out all the ones that were, created in a certain year that made them silver. So basically just took out the ones that were valuable, basically worth more than 50 cents. And then now I have to roll them to bring the rest back, wherever. So anyway, it's something I figured I'd do here. But good morning, you guys. Let's talk real estate. Let's talk creative financing. I figured, if you said, oh, yours have copper in them. Okay. Yeah. So I have a thing on my phone that tells me what year. Let me see if I can remember off the top of my head because it's been a minute. This is an older pile here. It's been a bit since I've done it, but I think 1967 and older is a certain percentage. I think it's like 70% or no, 40% silver. And then I think it's 1964 and older is 90% silver. They call this junk silver. So anyway, it was a fun little thing to do. And so let me share something about that. So, all right. You can kind of see here I have an entire little, jar of these. These are these are $50, 50 cent rounds. It took me, so funny enough, I learned this through TikTok. So I got on TikTok and I started learning about different things. And someone was doing where, they would go get a roll of, $50 and they would go through the roll and they would say, hey, this is what is more valuable, basically more valuable than 50 cents. And so it took me learning about it to know what was valuable. And so again, I have a note in my cell phone that's like, if it's this year or higher, it's this, like basically, oh, cool. So you said you got a Buffalo nickel, stuff like that. Stuff like this. It's just, it's been fun, right? I remember growing up, I used to get these $50, right? And it was so fun. They're just not in circulation really anymore. But to coordinate this and correlate this to real estate it's when I started learning more about it, I knew what to look for. For example, they've got the year on the bottom, right? So if I looked for the, certain year, I would know if it's more valuable. Same thing with by the way, same thing with a quarter, same thing with a dollar, same thing with a nickel and a penny, is if you know what to look for with coins. But the same thing with real estate. The more you know what to look for, the more you know how to say, hey, that's not just a house. This is, an opportunity for it to be more valuable. Whether it's a house that's on a lot that's zoned for a duplex, whether it is a house that is boarded up and you're like, hey, there's potential motivation here, right? How many of you guys, when you first started getting, started in real estate and you started learning about driving for dollars, maybe beforehand you might have picked up on the grass being high, the mailbox being full, the windows being boarded up, like maybe you saw that. But then after you learned that those were signs that, maybe that's a motivated seller and a potential for you to earn money, again, if you contacted them, structured a deal, all of that, now you see them everywhere, right? How many of you guys has that happened to you? I know it happens to me. I mean, I go on vacation and I'm like, I might be very far from home and I'm like, I got to write down the address. That house is boarded up or that house had a fire and it looks like it's been, abandoned since the fire. So same thing. The more that you are, aware, the more educated you are, the more that you can train your eyes to find opportunity. So like, for example, with these half dollars, right? When I got a roll and I started learning how to, spot certain things. So like, for example, one of them's like the date, but like you see how the face is right here? Well, if you flip, there's the eagle. But for example, I had one that when I flipped it, the eagle was the wrong direction. That made it a lot more valuable. But I only learned that whenever I, started, paying more attention and started learning more. And so same thing with real estate is that you can, like, this is a little fun little hobby for me. But the reality is that the more you train your eyes, the more that you get, educated and informed, it's the more that you can see opportunity. But sometimes that opportunity looks like, I had a business partner, still a business partner of mine, Aussie Steve. We probably co-wholesaled a dozen deals years ago before we actually started owning rentals together. And so this is the story of how we bought our first rental together. So at that point, he was based out of New Orleans. I was based out of the North Shore, which is about an hour difference, and two very different markets, right? The city, the suburbs. And the North Shore could be rural. So, again, some properties can be a lot more difficult. I owned and ran at that point the North Shore RIA, the Real Estate Investors Association. And so I had a ton of relationships, and I knew the market very well. So anytime he would get leads for the North Shore, we would work them together. And so, like I said, about that point, we probably had done like close to a dozen together at that point, okay? So he knows I'm competent. I know he's competent. We worked well together. And he goes, hey, Courtney, I have another lead on a deal on the North Shore. He goes, but it's a deal I've never done before because it's 3 houses, so like a small package. And I've done a ton of package deals over the years. And so long story short, he goes, hey, can you be a little bit more involved on this one so that from the beginning I know how to structure it? I'm like, okay. So I actually go on the appointment with him. I remember because the 3 houses were all on the same street and they were all tenant occupied, and the seller was dead set that like, hey, he maintains these properties, they're turnkey, ready to go. And so he just gave the tenants, a heads up, 24-hour notice that we were going to go see the property. All right. So Steve and I go to the property, and it was not turnkey. The seller learned about, basically, 2 tenants refused to let us in. We eventually learned it's because they had leaks, and basically there's a photo that exists of me on the internet where half of my body is underneath. There was a hole in the living room because the tenant wasn't reporting a plumbing leak, and basically the subfloor rotted. And so again, half my body was underneath the subfloor, looking underneath the property through the hole in the living room. And the tenants didn't want to let the landlord in because they hadn't been reporting it. And so, And I just remember I watched the color drained from the landlord's face. You could just see he was like so proud that he was maintaining his properties. He was going to sell them, you know, in turnkey condition. And I remember, you know, I just can, you know, I said, look, man, it happens to the best of us. You know, I'm sorry this is happening. Like, you could just tell it really impacted him. And the next tenant didn't want to let us in either. So 2 out of the 3 tenants didn't want to let us in. Obviously, we had given proper notice so we could. And so one of the first one, it was a major hole in the living room. That was a plumbing leak. That was basically, there's moisture underneath the house from the plumbing leak. And her water bill must have been running at that point. So I'm just like, why wouldn't you say something? Like, anyway. So the tenant next door, she was like, well, I don't want to let y'all in either. And she was super feisty. I mean, she got in my face like this. Got in the owner's face and all that. Long story short, though, we eventually get in. She had a washer machine in the hallway that had a leak, and so she just put plywood over it because the subfloor was getting soft. And again, he was like, why didn't y'all tell me? I would have come and fixed it. Like, he genuinely cared to fix it. Well, it was because she had a pit bull chained to the side of the house, and she wasn't supposed to have a pet, and the dog was scratching the side of the house, and, you know, all this stuff. So long story short, you know, we're walking these houses, and so I'm trying to structure a deal. And after we get out of that second one, the owner's shaking his head and he's, you know, saying some stuff as we're walking back to our cars. And I'm just hitting Steve behind me. I'm just hitting him. And eventually, you know, we end the appointment and I say, hey, let's pull around to the corner. We pulled into a parking lot around the corner. So we had just walked these 3 houses. And the owner just looked at us. He said, it's obviously not in the same condition. And I said, well, are you open? Are you flexible to price? He said, yeah, just work up your numbers and make us an offer. I said, okay. Well, when Steve and I had pulled into the parking lot, I remember there was a church around the corner. We pulled into the parking lot, and I just look at him, and I go, this man will seller finance these properties to us. I said, we would be a fool to wholesale them. And so with that being said, I said, look, I'll either pay you a fee and then I'll keep these as rentals and I'll structure the seller finance, or I like you enough and I'd actually own these properties with you. And so he's like, hey, I'd be open to that too. And so that was the start of our rental portfolio. I structured a creative finance deal with those, you know, with that seller, and we got all 3 of those properties on seller finance. Easily one of the best deals of my career, you know, stuff like that. But what am I talking about? I started off saying, you know, talking about these stupid coins. They're not stupid, but is when I learned more about what to notice on them, I started to notice, you know, more opportunity. Same thing. While I'm walking behind that landlord, I am hearing things that he is saying. And I'm like, this guy, I know, because my skill set has improved, I know this guy is primed for creative finance. And so a huge part of that, guys, is if you're wanting, you know, kind of, I see you're saying you want to learn this so bad. A huge part of that, it's, again, continuing to get around the language, continuing to learn about it, because the reality there is the more you know, the more you've trained your eyes to see, you've trained your ears to hear, that's when you start to say, hey, this seems like an opportunity for XYZ. And so that's just something I want to kind of share with you guys this morning. And then just as you continue to, you know, expose yourself to, you know, real estate and creative financing and different types of things, you can, you know, really recognize those things. So let's talk through it. So, all right, first question is, I wanted to ask if you think the BRRRR method is still going and is the key to find the proper lender and work with them. You know, I'll be very honest. I've never done the BRRRR method. So I've never bought a property. So the BRRRR method, right, you generally are going to buy it for, whether it's cash, you use private money, hard money, you know, something like that, seller finance, something. And then you renovate the property, get it rented out, and then you go and you refinance into long-term debt. I've never done the BRRRR method. I just told a story of one of my business partners, Aussie Steve, who, he has his own portfolio of rentals. I have my own portfolio, and then we have a portfolio we own of rentals together. He has done the BRRRR method a lot. I can tell you right now, he has stopped. I think his last BRRRR deal was in 2022. And I mean, like, he did like 20 plus BRRRR deals, one right after the other. So like, he was doing them pretty consistently. But he hasn't done one at this point. I think he didn't do one all of 2023, if I remember right, or all of 2024 so far. He shifted more to creative finance deals with me. I don't think, like, he loves the BRRRR method. So, I see that he would go back to it. I think he's also pulled back, on the gas pedal some. I will say this. Yesterday I talked on the phone with my friend Dominique Gunderson. She has been doing the BRRRR method. So, I'll say this. I'm not the best to speak on it because I've never done the BRRRR method. I'm not saying I won't do it, but I've never done it. I will say, if you get into a deal where the beginning of the deal has a balloon, meaning maybe it's the seller says, hey, I'll take payments for the first 2 years, but after that, for the first 6 months, the first 5 years, and I'd be very careful with the 6 months, by the way. If they say, hey, or maybe it's a hard money loan that's 12 months long, I'd be very careful with that, right? Because then it forces you to either have to sell or have to refinance, right? And so absolutely do I believe that you need to line up financing for the second part of the deal in the beginning. Because what if that lender was like, hey, we want to see X, Y, Z. And if you could have structured that in the beginning and saved yourself either some money, some headache, or even, time, that's important. And so I would 100%, line up my end financing, your long-term fixed financing before you even close on the deal. And look, if I remember right with Steve, a lot of his BRRRR method stuff was 6 months. And so 6 months sounds like a long time, but balloons, which is, again, you've got funding until this amount until this amount of time, and at this time you need to sell, refinance, pay us off, whatever. My mentors always taught me that balloons are for clowns, and they should be in the circus, not in real estate. So that's funny, but at the same time, that does not mean I haven't done a balloon in my career. I just know if I've done a balloon, 2 things: that the deal is a good enough deal that it can handle that. And then number 2 is that if I have a balloon in my financing, is that I'm going to get started ASAP working on the refinance, working on selling it, working on paying it off. Because if you want time to move fast, insert a balloon into your financing, because then time's going to go like that. At the end of the day, I think that in this changing market, some of the people who I've seen most at risk are those with a balloon. Because right now, you're struggling to sell quickly, right? Like in this market, it's not easy to sell a property really quickly. And this market, to refinance is not so easy, right? So you want to be careful inserting a lot of balloons into your portfolio. You want to be careful having a lot of balloons at once. Like, for example, if you've got 10 rentals and all 10 rentals have balloons in the same year, you want to be careful, okay? And if you've listened to any of my podcasts, I'm thinking of a few episodes. So first of all, I think it's episode number 3, where it is an interview that I did with Aussie Steve that talked about the power of long-term debt, the power of debt, I think it was. And we had a really good conversation about this. And so this is for the Strategic Success Podcast. And then episode... might have been 12. I think it was John Schaub. Well, I know the episode's John Schaub, but I think the number's 12. Which is, I had my mentor, John Schaub, who's been investing since the 1970s. He's still investing. By the way, I emailed him last night asking him some advice. I was kind of up late thinking about something, so I emailed him, right? And during that interview, I asked him, what is one lesson that if you would have learned it sooner, your career would have, seen more success or, stuff like that? What is one lesson? And it's kind of the idea of when I ask that question, it's like, hey, what was the thing that you had to learn the hard way? And that was a really pivotal lesson. And his answer was to be careful with short-term debt. Be careful with short-term debt. And now he's been through the 70s, when interest rates went up to 18 to 21%. He was there during, the 80s, then, the inflation in the 80s, and to the 90s, the dot-com boom, the 2008 crash, and he's in Florida, so those valuations went like this. So he's been through a lot of different markets, and that's something that I've really appreciated from my what I respectfully call my gray-haired mentors is that they're not just a guy who did 1,000 deals in the last 10 years. Respectfully, I'm in that category. I've done, I haven't done 1,000, but I've done hundreds of deals in the last 10 years. And although volume is a great teacher, it only teaches you how to play. For example, if you've only ever played, well, let me say this. If you've only ever driven a car when it's, in the middle of the day and the sun is shining, well, it's not going to prepare you for what it's going to be like to drive at night or to drive during the snow or to drive, during the rain. And so that's the power of having mentors who've been through multiple cycles, which is also why, number one, with the podcast, I want to interview my mentors, people who've been in the business 20, 30, 40, 60 years, and my allies so that you guys can get a taste of that. And then secondly, I want to carry on their message. Part of when I do my workshops throughout the year, there's a lot of lessons they've taught me that I want to carry on, because unfortunately we just lost one of them. Dyke Spotifer was a giant of a real estate investor out of Georgia, and he just recently passed away. And that's a huge loss for the real estate community, and a lot of you don't even know who he is. At some point, I would love to interview his daughter on my podcast, but, it's way too soon to do that. But at some point, I hope to, because I want to showcase that. But the other thing there is anytime, one of my favorite, I've got 2 classes that I love to bring people to with me. One of them's in April. It's when 2 of my main mentors, I'm talking my top 3 mentors, they teach a class every April, and it's Pete Fortunato and John Schaub. Y'all, we're lucky that they have a website, but they do not have a YouTube. They do not have an Instagram, right? And so, but it's all word of mouth. And this is a class that's every April in Tampa, and they're both in their mid to late 70s. And so I don't know how much longer they're going to do these classes, but I have brought dozens of people to that class. Earlier this year, it was the title of it was Offense and Defense. And John and Pete, they both, Pete's been investing since the 60s, John's been investing since the 70s, and they approach real estate differently. Pete is allergic. It is against his religion to pay taxes. John say, I'll pay the taxes and move on, right? Pete would stroke if he had to pay taxes, right? So they approach things very differently, but yet they're both buy and hold investors. They're very creative investors. They've been doing this for decades, and so I love bringing people to that class. I've probably brought a few dozen to their classes over the years. And then my other favorite class is Gary Johnston's Financial Freedom Principles class, which he teaches twice a year, once in Atlanta and once in California. Every Labor Day and Memorial Day, I think, is, and it's like a class he does every year. And I've brought a lot of people. I've been to that class 5 times myself. And even with my loved one, I've been to it twice. So that's a class about financial principles. And so understanding how money works and understanding how debt works, you want to make sound investing decisions, right? And so by inserting a balloon or what's called an adjustable rate mortgage, where, like a lot of times with the commercial loans, you'll have a 20-year loan, 25-year loan, but at 5 years, they're going to readjust the rate. So a lot of times if you go to like a local bank and you get a loan with them, that's what they do. You want to be careful with that. 5 years is a little bit safer than 6 months, 12 months, or 2 years. But, imagine if you were in 2020 and you had a 5-year balloon. How's next year looking? Do you think that, you would be in a better position? Maybe, right? Maybe. So keep those things in mind. Great question. Any other questions? I've been ranting this morning. So any questions? You guys working on any real estate deals that you have questions about, or questions about, what I just talked about? And here I am just putting these little $50 down here on the table, because I'm going to be separating them in a second. All right. Connie says, no banks involved is the way to go. I lean towards people rather than institutions. I've only ever involved banks 2 ways. Number one, I did a home equity line of credit very early on in my career. And I used that for about 3 deals, and then I didn't continue using it. Maybe I should have kept it open. I'll be honest. Maybe I should have kept it open and kept using it. But it is what it is. And then the second one is when I buy deals subject to their existing loan, I'm not involving the bank in the sense I'm going to get a loan from the bank, but I'm institution adjacent, because the deal I'm using the seller's relationship in the bank loan that they got to fund the acquisition of the deal. Yeah, 6 months isn't long. It goes by fast. You're not wrong. You want to be very careful with short-term debt. This is why people get hurt with hard money loans. I spoke to a hard money lender the other day, and they said, look, there's a lot of people who are not meeting the deadlines. And so, be careful. One of the reasons I like working with individuals versus institutions is that, for example, like if I used private money and I built in let's just say a balloon or something like that. Again, I don't love them, but if I'm going to use them, I want to build in some backstops. I might build into the paperwork that for, $250, $500, depending on the deal size, might even be $1,000, that I can extend the, balloon for another year, 2 years. If I put some money up front, of course, I'm still making the payments. But I can say, hey, I can extend the term. Because, what if it was 2020 when a balloon came up? I'd be nervous, right? I don't know if I'm able to collect my rent. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do X, Y, Z. So you want to be mindful with that. And 6 months goes by really fast. One of the examples of a subject to deal that I've seen go wrong was when the investor told the seller, that they would refinance the property in 6 months. And they actually put that in writing. And so they were in default when they could not refinance the property out of the subject to debt into, debt that was in their name long term. So again, be very careful to what you agree to. Think about a balloon as a lever. I will only allow it if the other terms are favorable, right? If a seller wants the highest price, the highest down payment, the highest interest rate, and they're like, I want it to where you pay me off in 3 years. Again, you want to be very careful, very careful. When you have balloons, you want to say, hey, what are my ways out of this? Do I have enough equity that I can go get 10 different types of loans today? A private money loan, I can go get a DSCR loan, I can go get a bank loan, I can sell this at a discount. You want to be very careful when you institute balloons. And fun fact, balloons should not have any place in owner-occupied properties. That is against Dodd-Frank. All right, guys, any questions? See you guys hanging out with me today. I'd love to continue hanging out with you, answering some questions. But I promise you, my dogs don't want to keep hearing my voice. So this is Waffle. She's a rescue doodle. And she, our common saying is don't look to the dogs for motivation. You see here, just laying these out. I'm going to roll them in a little bit. So any questions, you guys? Any questions about some of the things we were talking about or a deal you are working on right now? Those 4 new constructions that I am working on are getting inspected today. And the 4 new constructions I'm under contract to buy. So we'll see how that goes. Can you explain the DSCR a little? I'll be very honest, I'm not the best to do it. I've never used the DSCR loan, and so I'm not going to speak on something I don't have experience with. But my understanding is asset based, and but there's still going to be some things they're going to look at. Jordan says the best book you're reading. Good question, Jordan. So obviously, this is just one of my libraries. I have another one in the office. I love to read. I usually read 40 to 60 books a year. But this year, I've been holding back. I'm actually reading Jack Miller. When I say I have 5 top mentors, Jack Miller is the 5th one, and he's deceased. I've never met him. He died in 2009. But he influenced all my other 4 mentors, and I've learned so much from him. So Jack wrote a newsletter every month from October of 1978 until 2009. So, and that newsletter was like 3 to 6 pages long, and I have just about every single one of them. And I am currently in the 1980s reading newsletter by newsletter. So that is what I'm currently reading. I made a pledge this year that I'm not going to go, I usually pull a stack of these books every year and say, hey, this year, these are the things I want to grow in, so let me read books. Absolutely, Jordan. Jack Miller on cashflowdepot.com, his newsletters are on there. So I've been reading through his newsletters. Look, the 70s and the 80s, you could think that those headlines were today. It's crazy. I like a quote. One of Jack's quotes are, it is inconvenient to be physically alive and financially dead. And it is inconvenient, right? And I might have butchered it. It might actually be something else. But the reality is that's kind of what I'm reading right now. I am dabbling in a book, so I'm not actually reading it, but I'm just picking up and reading like a chapter at a time. It's called Poor Charlie's Almanac. And I don't remember who wrote it, and it's in my office, but it's a book on Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's business partner, and I like learning from Charlie. So I've read, a chapter here or there from that. So, all right. Do you ever give a down payment for a creative finance deal? Great question. Absolutely. I think that like zero money down and 0% interest is a unicorn. Have I done it? Plenty of times. Do I expect every deal to be that? No. So for example, I have a deal right now that I'm under contract that is pretty much 50% down and then the rest is seller financed. That is a more difficult, that's a more difficult type of deal to do. But I believe, and as my friend Maria once said, is that down payments solve problems. And so sometimes that's necessary. So sometimes it looks like me putting a $10,000 down payment, or like for this one, it's 50% of the purchase price. Although that is not, we don't love to do it. It's what am I getting in return? So keep that in mind. Don't stray away from paying interest. Don't stray away from paying a down payment or something like that. It's look at the deal as a whole. So going back to that deal from earlier, and Colleen's right. It's all about that problem and solution. You're correct. So the deal I explained earlier, which was the one that I did, the very first deal I ever did with Aussie Steve, where we kept 3 rentals. And because we were wholesaling together at that point, every deal we had done together was a wholesale deal. But then this one, the 3-house one that we walked, the deal that I structured, and I think it was one of the better deals of my career, was 10,000. So it was 150,000, 10,000 down. The 140 was due in a year, so 1 year balloon, and it was interest only payments. All of those were ones that I'm like, man, these houses needed work. I usually, when a house needs a lot of work, I generally don't, try to do a ton of down payment. And to be fair, that, for a $150,000 purchase, 10,000 down, that's not even 10%. Okay. So, but with that being said, I normally would try to go for, a smaller down payment because of the work the properties needed. I normally would try to get it to where it was interest, principal and interest, not just interest only. Because I want to be chipping away, especially when there's a 1 year, balloon. I want to be chipping away at that principal. And then the 1 year balloon, again, I think that's highly, unsafe, right? And that short timeline. But guys, when that happened, I was like, man, at 150,000 for 3 houses, 2 of them needed work. 1 of them was across the street, did not need work. They were collecting, can I remember this right? They were collecting like 1,900, 18 or 1,900 as is right then a month in rents. And they were under market rents. They should have been like 2,300. And I believed it was easily worth, 185 as is, right? And so I was like, you know what? I think, obviously I didn't love all those things, but because the price was down, because they were occupied, if they would have been vacant like that, it would have been a different story. And so I was willing to make that adjustment. And then to finish out the deal, that was a deal that, we bought on a bond for deed. In Louisiana, that's called, it's called a bond for deed. Other states call it a contract for deed, or a land contract, or an agreement for deed. I usually, if I'm going to put money down like that, I'm generally going to want the title, right? But again, that was something that I was willing to, I don't say never. Again, when I say balloons are for clowns, I'm not going to say, hey, I'll never have a balloon in one of my deals. I was willing, when I looked at the whole picture, I was willing to do it. And so at the end of the day, that's when I made a decision that I was going to, the deal could handle it. We bought that deal. I immediately took the 2 properties that needed work. By the way, before the closing, the owner went in and reinstalled plywood over the subfloor and, made the property safe They weren't pretty, but they were safe. And so the one tenant that was not, she ended up not paying. She was the one getting in my face. We ended up evicting her. She was already, 1 foot out the door anyway. And then the one that, the other one, we restabilized her, put her on a longer term lease. We went up just a little bit, not a ton, but just a little bit. Let's just say she was at 700 and market rate was, 1,200. And so we might have put her up to 850 or something like that. I'm trying to remember because this was a handful of years ago now. And so then we had one vacant, one of them that we got it up, and then the other one we went up like $25 a month, but that one didn't need work. And we sold the 2 properties that needed work as is, and we sold them. So if you remember, we purchased for $150, $10,000 down, $1,200 a month, interest only with a 1-year balloon. And we were getting like 18 something in rents early on. And so we redid, we didn't renovate the houses. We just restructured the tenants, or we got the bad tenant out. And, we got the other one on a better lease and at a better rate, and sold those 2 within 6 months as is for $151,000. So we paid off the balloon to the seller. And what happened to that third house? By the way, the one that was in the best condition of the 3. And so it was in the best condition, and it had the tenant that was the best. What happened? Anyone paying attention to the numbers here? Don't pay attention to my dog who's barking at the dehumidifier going off. All right, so we bought it for $150, 10 down, $140 was financed, due in a year. There you go, Jordan. The last one was a free and clear keeper property. I still have that property today. It's worth about $100,000, and it's free and clear. Now, do I want to keep owning in this neighborhood? Probably not. So we want to sell it at some point, probably next year or 2. But, we were getting $775. That tenant just moved out. We went and put $3,500 into the property, and it's listed for rent at $1,050 right now. Y'all, creative. 2-dog alarm. 1 second. Hey, stop. I think it was the mailman. So, at the end of the day, Creative Finance has allowed me to get free and clear properties. It has not been 30 years of paying a mortgage or getting a big windfall of cash and paying off some of my rentals free and clear. The ways that I've been able to get free and clear rentals have been through Creative Finance and through structuring deals. No one's going to say, that deal did not say, hey, if you do XYZ, you'll get a free house out of this. No. The deals are not found, they're created. You've got to keep that in mind. Any final questions, you guys? By the way, I've done a few deals like that where I've gotten free deals out of it, by the way. I just did another one again earlier this year. So keep that in mind. It is not impossible, because how have I done it more than once? It's all about the numbers. That book I was referencing earlier, Jordan, that Poor Charlie's Almanac, had a quote, and this is a Charlie Munger quote, that said, numerical literacy, if I remember right, basically understanding the numbers. Without numerical literacy, it's like entering a ass-kicking contest as a one-legged man, right? It's not even fair, right? And so if you can understand the numbers, and if you can understand how to make the money work for you and the numbers work for you, and then if you learn how to do deals safely, right, you're in a better position. But thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I'm gonna finish rolling these $50 and then knock out some of the rest of my to-do list for the day. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and thanks for putting up with the 2-dog alarm. They were getting on to the whether it's a delivery truck or mailman or something. So guys, have a great day, and talk with you guys soon.